Spiro. I am the president and co-founder of School Sims. I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar today. Um, just wanted to take a moment for those of you who may be not familiar with simulations, just to give you a little bit of a sense of what we're talking about. Since there's no taxonomy in the space, simulations mean a lot of things to a lot of people. And we're going to talk about a particular form of simulation and really be able to extrapolate from that in terms of the research that our panelists have done. So next slide, David. So, for us, just so you know, background-wise, I've been doing simulations, computer-based simulations for over 35 years. This is what I do. I've done it in other industries, but for the last 10 years, it's been in education, specifically targeting K-12 leaders and also now teachers and counselors. And for us, what a simulation is first of all, our belief is that experience is the best teacher. We know that. You wouldn't put a pilot in a plane. You wouldn't put a doctor or nurse into a patient suite or a soldier in the field without hours of simulation. We feel the same applies for our educators and administrators. However, what's really important is that since we don't have time, we don't have space, we need it to be scalable. And so that's why we do these things computer-based. So it's self-contained. It is an opportunity to capture a problem of practice in a choose-your-own-adventure type format so that we can place the problem into a context. So there's an opportunity to build situational awareness. Then there's the opportunity for judgment. You have to make decisions. So there's that opportunity for exercising judgment. Then we want you to experience consequences, right? As challenging as decision-making is, often it's the consequences that really mess us up, right? There's always blowback. And the opportunity to experience things that could happen as a result of our choices, especially when they don't go well, is wonderful. And maybe as pertains to the content of our discussion today, this is the most important aspect of this might be the reflection, right? Having the experience is one thing, but having the opportunity to reflect on it is another. And so that's kind of what we mean by simulation. You can do them synchronously, asynchronously, in person, virtually, totally up to you. You can do them again on your own or one-to-one, in groups, etc. Because obviously scalability is key. The next slide, David. And we have a library. So these are existing applications. Each one of these embodies anywhere from 6 to 10 decision points where you're dealing with this problem of practice. And you have access to the library as an institution, whether you're a university, whether you're a school, a district, you have access to the library, and you deploy them as you see fit as part of the broader professional learning or professional development that you're doing. The sims are kind of an automated case study that can support any body of knowledge because what we simulate is time. And again, just to give you this broad scale, the next slide, David. We are working around the country in terms of working with, again, universities, schools, districts, and we actually are probably cleared 100,000 sim plays last year over the course of the year, and obviously over the last 10 years, it is significantly more than that. And so in terms of understanding this idea that experience is the best teacher and deploying necessary experience to develop our educators and our administrators, obviously it's something that is catching on. And, one of the key elements that we focus on in a sim is critical thinking, right? We can't train an administrator to be prepared for every single thing that they're going to face because everything they face is unique each time they face it, right? It's going to be different, whether it's the person is going to change, the timing is going to change, how people are feeling is going to change. So the best we can do is prepare people to be thoughtful, prepare people to have the confidence that whatever's going to come, they're going to be able to respond. And so in terms of one of the core elements, it is all about critical thinking. It's being thoughtful about different ways to respond. And part of that for us as an organization is to also recognize that even though we see what we know in terms of the deployment of this modality, when you put this into somebody else's hands, they'll see totally different things and totally new opportunities. And that's really what we hope to glean from this, right? We know what we know, but we'll only know what you know if you share with us. And that manifested in when I first met Dr. David DeYoung, when he was just a lowly professor at University of South Dakota, after having been a superintendent and worked his way through the school system, public school system. But when he first saw the simulations at a conference, he was intrigued about the opportunity to do them asynchronously. And frankly, I hadn't thought of that. I'm not a university professor. And he asked, is this something I can do? And we have said, of course. And off and running, we went with that modality. And you'll hear more about that. But it's been wonderful working with David over the last number of years, actually many years, and look forward to have him being able to share with you. And we love for me, I'm a carpenter with a hammer in my hand and everything looks like a sim. So talking with fellow enthusiasts is wonderful. And so when I first met Sara, she had been doing already, she actually developed her own product in this realm called eTips and was already doing research on different modalities across different ways of presenting experience. And so being able to engage in that, being part of that continuum, which again, I'm guessing she might mention, but to be able to look at the benefits that different modalities provide to most importantly prepare our educators and administrators to do their job, which is a very, very complicated job. And so with that, I want to hand it off to Dr. David DeYoung and Dr. Sara Dexter, and look forward to engaging with them and with you as we progress through this webinar.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Ken. It's been an honor to work with school sims over the past decade or so. And a little bit of more information about that is the first time I saw a simulation, I was like, I didn't even know this existed. And so I started using them in presentations and in my classes. And the more I used them, the more I liked them. And now I've been able to lead hundreds of simulations to thousands of people all across the country. And early on in my research career, I was like, you know what? I like these so well. Maybe I can use simulations as the basis for my research agenda, which is part of the reason that I'm here today to talk about some research that was just published in the last couple of months with Dr. Sara Dexter. So Sara, will you share a little bit more as well?
Yes. Hi. I too am a simulation enthusiast. As Ken mentioned, I created a platform that's really, I consider something like digital cases. But to me, the idea of letting learners have an experience that then we can have them talk about, and if it creates an artifact that we can examine and try to make some inferences about what did they learn from doing that experience, is just an ideal teaching tool. And there's, as you know, much as I'd love to say we've got it all figured out, there's a lot of research still to do about this, but we're excited, David and I, to share and have this opportunity to talk about one little addition that we made to the research page. So thank you for your interest and for coming today. Appreciate it.
Great. And the little bit that we want to add to the body of knowledge is this article, Experiential Learning Through Simulations and Fully Online Asynchronous Courses. And we really dove into the role of self-debriefing. And what we mean by that is in online asynchronous classes, students were assigned to complete a simulation on their own time. And so they would experience a simulation on their own, and then they would come to the discussion boards and they would respond to some questions. And that happened 826 times in these online asynchronous courses. So we did a content analysis about their responses, and we really dove into, okay, what are some of the themes as we dive into their responses. And that's what we're here to share with you today. The article was published in the Internet and Higher Education, and I believe you can find it online right now. Is that correct, Sara? Is it available?
Yeah, it's online available, and yes.
Great.
I can put.
Okay, Sara.
Okay, well, a few reasons why David and I enjoy using simulations in higher ed. A simulation could do many things. First, I think it's a great tool for instructors because it's something that you can provide to everyone in the course. It is not dependent on where they work, where they live, what their experiences have been leading up to when they're in your class, but rather you can make sure that everyone's receiving an opportunity for all participants to have to do. And I don't know, do I push the air button there? Thank you, David, for clicking that. So you can ensure that they encounter particular ideas where they have to emphasize application, and you have them think about multiple contexts in which that application might occur. Beep. And this allows you to also provide them multiple chances. They get do-overs, okay? And ideally, simulations will provide some sort of artifact of the student's learning. And when they produce this artifact and you can look at it, you can give them feedback, they can repeat it, and it allows for that iterative development where you have some oversight. As an instructor in a leadership program, one thing I'm a little frustrated by is that it's very difficult for me to be out in the field where students are doing internship hours or where they're applying knowledge from class. And so this provides this little intermediate space where I can have a lot more oversight and peeking over their shoulder, and they get to make their thinking visible. You know, I heard a presentation recently about the new demands on school leaders, and it suggested to me that things are coming so fast and becoming so complex that it's really important to promote automaticity of what we are trying to teach them as foundational knowledge and how to apply it in situations. If they don't have that deeply integrated into their way of thinking, then when something happens, it's going to be much more of a cognitive load for them to execute on that information. So, you know, if they have something a lot more deeply internalized, it would give a chance for them to be able to deal with the immediacy, maybe the demands, the novelty of the situation, but draw on something that they have had a chance to practice doing multiple times. This also means that it protects stakeholders from these novices, people that make up a screw up. It's fail safe. They do not harm anyone.
Yeah,
David's going to show a demo now. Yeah.
yes. I just want to underline that simulations, one of the things that I love the most about them is they provide a safe environment for future teachers, future principals, future counselors, or superintendents. They provide the space for them to try new ideas, to experience consequences of a situation without having any real world ramifications. And we decided when we were setting this up, we were like, you know what, let's give them a demo so that way they can kind of see what it may look like. So I'm going to switch screens right here and I'm going to push play. And in this simulation, what happens is you are now a principal, everybody, and you have gone into your office, and Kim Campana is one of your best teachers. And she comes into your office, she shuts the door, and she shares these concerns.
Thank you for meeting with me. I'm sorry I am so upset, but I've been trying to decide if I should even come to you about this. Now I think I've waited too long, but you must know, Diana is very tough on the kids. She has her favorites, but with some kids, she has such an attitude. She's sarcastic and she calls them lazy, and she's making some of them really shut down. I do all I can to build the kids up. But we're supposed to be teaming in her classroom. She's making that impossibly hard. On top of that, she's just so rude to some kids and to me.
How will you respond to Kim's concerns? Make a choice from the following. 1. Thanks so much for opening up about your concerns, Kim. What are your perceptions about what is going on? Or 2, I've seen some of the same issues with Diana. I'm glad you feel comfortable coming forward. Tell me more about what you've been seeing. Or 3, Kim, you need to understand that she is trying to motivate kids that are falling through the cracks. Some of those kids just need the kind of tough love she is delivering. Or 4, I hear your concerns. The problem is that if it's just you, it is a he said, she said situation. I haven't heard from others who share your concerns.
All right, so now you've seen one video with one decision point. And what happens now Ken already used the word choose your own adventure. The participants can choose which option they think is best. And then a different screen comes up, a different video, a different narrator, and you experience the consequences of your decision. In this specific decision point, most people choose A. Some people will choose B, and then they'll write about this first sentence here. I've seen some of the same issues with Diana. And then they'll talk about whether that's an appropriate thing to say or an inappropriate thing to say. And based on each one of these choices, it leads to 4 different videos. So the simulation kind of branches out based on the decisions that you make. Now, we just experienced that for maybe 90 seconds, and most simulations last about an hour. So now you kind of give a little bit of context of what this actually means and what it actually looks like when you are demoing a school sim. So, Sarah.
Right. Hi. So I want to talk next about the theory base behind what it is that we did some research on. And debriefing is the notion that you ask people about their experience following the simulated event. And the idea is that you are trying to get them to organize their thinking in their mind, reflect on it, and do some analysis so that they're really considering, what did I just experience? What was that experience for me? What did it make me think of? What am I taking away from it? And, debriefing can be done one-to-one. It can be done in a group. And we normally think of debriefing as being done synchronously, as a conversation. And, the overall goal of it is to engage learners in transfer. So that they are, taking what they got from this experience and bringing it forward to a future experience. Now, in an online asynchronous environment, that kind of conversational exchange isn't possible. So what is the alternative? It is still incredibly important for people to reflect on their experience and consider it, analyze it, think about what else to do in the future. And there's been a lot of research on this in the health sciences field, in nursing and in medical education. They've been using debriefing and even self-debriefing for a much longer period of time. And so David and I drew upon that research and, took some things away of how to analyze what it is and call what it is that happened. While David's, approach was sort of natural for someone teaching an online class, well, you use the discussion board. Of course, you're going to have some questions for people, and you want them to think about it. Now, I think this is particularly relevant as we consider how many programs are online in leadership ed. We have 638 online, or have 638 programs. 78% of them have an online component, and 32% of them are asynchronous entirely. So this notion of getting our game together for debriefing is incredibly important. And so we can look to the literature about this. And I just want to say one more thing, is that about briefing and pre-briefing. Briefing is kind of the idea that you help people understand what it is that they're going to be doing. Most of the school sims have, something built into that. As you enter the sim, it tells you your character, who the other players are, where to go for information. Pre-briefing is the notion that you have set the stage. Why are we doing this learning experience? So it's this debriefing after the experience that I want to make more emphasis on. And in the literature, if you're interested, you can follow up. There's a ton of information, rubrics about gauging and, looking at your quality of pre-briefing, briefing, and debriefing. There's, some data about debriefing in particular that, it's not as good for resolving unsettled feelings or further students seeking greater guidance because it wasn't conversational. But those just give us more underscoring of the fact that your instructional surround for the simulation is even more important. David, I have a sense you're telling me move on. You advanced my slide.
It was kind of like
Okay, so we are talking about debriefing being the plus to the experience, right? You can, the tagline for School Sims is experience is the best teacher. And as Ken acknowledged, and reflection upon experience is incredibly important. So one conceptual framework for thinking about this is, in fact, Kolb's experiential learning theory, that whether it's an in-person situation or an online situation, it's just some kind of experience a person had. You then want to guide them through the remaining 3 steps. First, that they have a reflection on that experience. Next, that they think about what does that relate to? They try to connect it to prior knowledge. They sort of categorize it. They adjust the schema of their thinking in their mind. And last, that they think, oh, based on my experience here and what I take away, what would I do different next time? So we use this as our conceptual frame to kind of get people to consider this as an actual lived experience, to create a virtual practicum, a guided experience. So first, the questions that we asked.
Yeah, the first question that we asked in the self-debriefing, how does this information in the simulation apply to your current or future role? So this question was asked 826 times in a row and was a part of our content analysis. Actually, all of the questions that I'm about to give you were asked to every one of the students in the online course. And the reason that this question came up first is in ed leadership courses specifically, you can't always assume that everybody is a teacher that wants to become a principal. There's lots of different avenues, pathways for, maybe they work at a educational agency, maybe they work as a counselor, maybe they work as a PE teacher or a 3rd grade teacher or a high school math teacher. And really what this first question really makes them reflect on, like, okay, how did this apply to me and my previous experiences? The next question that was asked to everybody, were there any unethical or unprofessional actions in play during the simulation? One thing that's cool about school sims, in my opinion, is they're all a little edgy. They're all a little like, their leadership is gray in that if it was so easy and if it was black or white and like, this is the right answer, this is the wrong answer, that we wouldn't have a need for simulations. But the school sims really dives into like unethical actions or unprofessional actions that really put a leader or an educator right in the middle of the gray area. The third question that we talked about was professional norms. And we really had them reflect on what were some of the themes going on within the simulation that you can draw out. So one of the reasons this question was included early on was you really have to experience the whole simulation in its entirety in order to answer that question well. So we also asked this question: what was the most important leadership lessons from the simulation? And made people really think deeply about, okay, what did I learn? What would I do differently if I could do this again? What could I do in the future if I had a similar situation? And really got them thinking about leadership lessons. And then finally, conclude your post with a question or statement that explains something you're wondering about. So that is a great way to end a discussion post, because how this was set up is their peers had to then read the original thoughts of the author, and they had to then respond to two of their peers. And we did not include the responses of the peers in this research study. We only analyzed the 826 original posts. Sara, can you talk about the themes, please?
Yeah, I'm going to give a really brief overview of the themes, which are listed on the right-hand side. David's going to go into each one with some example quotes and say more about its prevalence in our data set. But I wanted to highlight for you that we saw themes that emerged and connected to each of the phases in Kolb's experiential learning cycle, plus, as listed on the bottom, a bonus phase. So we use this code book to both, create a systematic search to see, would this conceptual framework align with the data? Yes, it did. And then that guided a search for themes in the data and creating a systematic examination of all those text responses. So David's going to next talk about each theme on the right-hand side in turn.
Yeah, so one of the first themes that stood out to us when we were coding it was diving into the concrete experience where simulations were really stirring something up in somebody. So we had 800 or 210 examples of the 826 responses. And people often talked about their feelings or their emotions. And what was interesting about this one is they would start their post with it. So these are some examples of our code, of the 210 codes that we came up with. This simulation kept a pit in my stomach for the entire duration of the session. This was a heart-wrenching simulation as it conjures up vivid images. So these are real quotes from the students that were self-debriefing in the online class. So those are examples that they were actually having a concrete experience while going through the simulation. Our second theme really dove into the reflective observation, this green section of Kolb's experiential learning theory. We had over 400 examples. And, some examples quotes were, important lessons to be learned from this simulation are the importance of addressing confrontational issues like this in a timely fashion. The lesson I learned is that communication is important in facilitating a collaborative work group. And really, this proves that they were truly reflecting on their experience in an online asynchronous class. The third theme that came out was connecting to their past experience. There's over 200 examples of this, and quotes are, when I first started watching, I thought to past experiences where I've had to deal with very similar issues. Or I know why I was gun shy, because earlier in my administrative career, I had an upset parent who twisted my words and attempted to get me fired. They were really making connections, and I have found this to be true when in asynchronous classes and when I lead simulations in a synchronous manner, where they will almost always make a connection like, oh, this happened to me 2 weeks ago, and while they're self-debriefing with a peer. The fourth theme was relevant and realistic. So now we're diving into the abstract conceptualization phase of the experiential learning theory. And over 300 examples of this, and quotes are, when I first started watching, I thought to past experiences when I've had to deal with very similar issues. Or another one is, in my experience, continually lamenting the students' inadequacies is typically an action of teachers who either do not know how to address the challenges or who are not up for the challenge. So they're really learning from the experience, and that's relevant and realistic. And then finally, the fifth theme that we came up with is imagining future application. an active experimentation phase, where a quote is, "This simulation was actually quite convicting for me. I do have a difficult teacher who undermines other teachers and the work they're doing, though it is not generally as blatant as in this scenario. I must be more proactive and address the behavior so it will stop before I lose teachers who are really doing a good job in working on customizing learning." And that's a great example. Like, if you are a professor or a school leader and you want people to learn during a simulation, and they come away saying, "I'm convicted by this simulation because if I don't do something about it, I might lose a great teacher in my school system." That's pretty good evidence that simulations work. Moving on to aligned self-debriefing questions.
Before you do that, I just want to point out that all of these quotes that David shared, especially when they would be considered in the context of the student's group of 5 answers, so like moving him back into his role at putting his hat on of instructor, think of how they serve as providing insight to what the learner is taking away from the experience. And then you look across a group of students, think of them as an artifact of this experience that you assign to students. You get a chance to sort of see, they made their thinking visible. You get a chance to see what their past experiences, the connections that they're making, and whether your instruction is landing. So going back to those earliest comments that I made, it's not only an experience for them, it's a chance for you to get insight into how this is provoking them and what kinds of connections are they making. It makes something that was in their head visible in a way that certainly assigning them a paper can also do, but this is a bit more engaging for them, and it naturally lends itself to them, creating a little bit broader range of things. Okay, so I've been asked to make a few comments here about self-debriefing questions, and we use some that we do not purport are the best questions ever to be used, or the only ones that could be created to align with Kolb's experiential learning theory. So I'm going to describe a few questions and really just point out the importance of creating some questions that kind of align with each phase of the experiential learning cycle. If you want people to engage in that reflecting, then asking them to make connections to what they've been learning, then think about what are they going to be doing the next time. And perhaps you'd even assign them to do the simulation a second time or a third time, or just let them repeat it. So here's some examples. These are in the article, and David and I thought we'd share them, but only, again, as an example. I think it's also really important to make note that when you want students to engage in questions in a systematic way, as he did, he used his discussion board. There's other possibilities for how one might put these out with the assignment that you ask students to do, which really depends on your learning management system you happen to have. How can you post things? How can you ask students to systematically do something? Do you want post hoc them to have exchange? And are you as instructor going to be discussing those either individually to people's replies? Those are all discussion or points of, pedagogy that is up to you. But, it starts with asking people to kind of systematically walk through what just happened. And that, by definition, is what debriefing's all about, with these extra considerations we're describing as necessary for self-debriefing when you can't have that conversation. Now, if you are teaching in a synchronous environment or even a face-to-face environment, it makes it even easier for that to be more conversational. But I personally consider it really important to ask every student to respond individually to every question, because it's too easy, for you to kind of have a glossed over idea of like, well, what was that? And what did that make me? That reminded me of a situation without going through the systematic review. So the first few questions that we proposed in the article, and you could maybe think of some suggestions for additional ones in the chat or something, is to anchor it. How does this simulation apply to your current or future role? What were the experiences or emotions that you experienced during the simulation? What about your reflections after? What do you learn? All tied to this reflective observation moment. Now, some resources from nursing and healthcare give, a lot of general guidance on the kinds of questions to ask, but they tend to start in this idea of what just happened, what were the emotions, what were the thoughts, what's the tie to experience. Okay, the next category, abstract conceptualization. So, you might be personally teaching something about communication skills, emotional intelligence, soft skills, decision-making skills, trying to develop self-efficacy. You might have a variety of related things besides applying knowledge and skills. So you might ask a slightly different question here, but trying to get people to lift up their thinking to the level of abstracting. What was that? What kinds of thought did I engage in? What connections did I make to other topical areas? Something that asks people to characterize what it was that they took away from this. And last, some questions that get them thinking forward. Okay, if you face this situation, what would you do differently next time? And then we thought that it would be important for follow-up pedagogy to ask a question like number 6, something about now, what are you thinking about? What's a question that could easily feed forward into some kind of discussion you have in class or on a discussion board, or asking two peers to exchange about it. The point is being very thoughtful about how you ask people to engage with this experience that they just had, getting them to reflect upon it so that they take more away from what the simulation allowed them to consider and have as an experience. So the experiential learning cycle we propose can start with a simulation, can be a concrete experience. It doesn't have to be a in-person experience, but then incredibly important is the debriefing that follows it, so that you really use that and leverage it for all the possibilities that are inherent in taking time to ask them to do the experience.
Yeah, one thing I want to highlight there, Sarah, is the article that we published recently was rooted in just ed leadership courses. However, I'm only in charge of a teacher preparation program as a dean of the College of Education here. And we don't even have an ed leadership program, but we're using school sims synchronously and asynchronously at my university to train teachers. And we use these same questions work equally as well for future teachers, future counselors, future principals or superintendents, or whoever your audience is. So for example, I'm going to get real practical here. Let's say you're a school district that has an aspiring leadership group that meets once a month. I've met with hundreds of those about school simulations in the past 10 years. And these questions could be the questions that you ask your cohort of future leaders to respond to in between your meetings when you assign to them a simulation on their own to do asynchronously on their own. So we made these questions broad enough and these are just, like Sarah said, our recommendation. But we would think that you could branch off of these for anybody, no matter who your audience is. So as we kind of wrap things up a little bit, before we get to some questions and answers, we have the citation here. So if you wanted to download this. It's available right now in the internet and higher education. And it's been an honor to work with Sara. I'm not kidding. I've co-published with like dozens of people. Sara is my favorite. So it's been an absolute joy to get to this point and kind of culminate in being able to share this a little bit more broadly. I mean, thanks to School Sims for creating such a great opportunity and letting us think about how to use them differently. For example, when I said to Ken, I want to be the first professor in the world to try to use these asynchronously, I would have never imagined it would have gotten to this point. So it's good to be here. So let me go back a second. All right. Next here.
I just put the link in the chat for anyone who's interested. You'll have to be signed into your university's, library and authenticate whatever is important for you to do. So to access that. But oh, Steve's giving us a shout out. He read it and shared it with others. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So do you want to make some comments here, or shall we
I didn't know if Ken wanted to make some,
Q&A?
or should we go right to Q&A? Ken, it's your choice.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to point something out, but thank you. That was great. It's always delightful to, we talk about favorite people. I mean, it's wonderful to be able to see the application of the beauty of this modality is it's not about the product. It's about what it enables in the participants, right? That's what experience is all about, right? It's unique to the individual, how they process it, having an experience, how they contextualize it, how it brings out their lived experiences with the content that it's blended with, and then allows them to think about the context in which they're operating and bring it all together in a safe space where they can consider and to have the opportunity to expand the different ways and different places this can manifest. For me, it's a mystery that everybody isn't simulating. Yes, obviously I'm biased, but when we know that experience is the best teacher and we look at the challenges that our educators and our administrators, I'm actually sometimes tickled, I guess is not quite the right word, but it's interesting having come from the business side of application. And as you look at leadership theory, as it were, writ large, right? Much of the insights we have about effective leadership come from the business world. And there's some really good ideas and really interesting frameworks. And ironically, the leaders that I've met on the business side, heads of corporations, large and small, I don't know a lot of them that could last a week in a building. And, as good as their leadership skills might be, the challenges of schooling, the challenges of education, as we're seeing from the data, right? It's not that we don't want to educate our children. It's challenging. And as we know more, it gets more challenging. So it's not like you get good at something and then you can kind of rest on your laurels. Every day is a new set of challenges. And so having the opportunity to apply in different ways, again, this modality allows itself to be applied in these kinds of different applications. And some of the things that you might not have thought about, but as we're seeing now, how do we prepare students for their licensure exams? On the one hand, they need an application for the content, right? To contextualize, especially if they're doing scenario-driven, responding to scenario-driven questions, whether it's for leadership or for teaching. But an additional component is one of the things that experience gives us is confidence, right? It boosts our thought about ourselves and our own ability to navigate, to deal. And so having this extra confidence may just help students to be better test takers, right? So as they're facing the stress of an exam where their ability to move forward might be hampered by how well they do, just having a little bit more confidence in taking and being able to apply what was being taught to them over the course of their learning could be beneficial. Or using it as part of an accreditation, right? I can't tell you how, I don't have to tell you, right, how challenging accreditation is, because we hear about how overwhelming it is for when we're working with universities to get through the accreditation process. Well, how about using the Sims as a demonstration of competence and being able to glean from the information that's there actually, so not just for development, but actually to help with the accreditation process to see how our program is doing. And one others is just thinking about the experience of, and both David and Sara mentioned this during the course of responding to the questions, is part of that self-efficacy, this idea of hope, right? And this is an area that I'm very interested in pursuing research on, and hope as defined as the kind of thinking about it in the framework of optimism versus hope, right? We can think positively. That's what optimism is. But hope is that I actually have agency. I'm actually going to do something to make things better, right? And that's something that having a little bit of efficacy, having confidence to be able to act, to do good, is a wonderful potential opportunity. But also, and as David actually highlighted this in the debrief component, the opportunity for the conversation, right? So when you have an experience that's individual to you, and the person sitting next to you is having also an experience, but a different one that's unique to them, the only way one student is going to know what the other person's experience is if they tell them. And this provides an opportunity in a very organic way to get them talking, to get them sharing. And what happens in that is that both, it builds team. So if you're doing it with an intact team, obviously that enhances lines of communication. If it's just, different students in a cohort, the opportunity there is they learn how to speak, but their experience portfolio expands because, our favorite thing to hear is when one student says, I never would have thought of it that way. And they heard it from a peer. So anyway, just some additional things to think about, but we did want to get to your questions. Here are some questions that were submitted in the registration process. So we want to get to some of these questions and obviously anything else that comes from the group. So please feel free to add questions in chat, but I'll turn it back to David in terms of responding to some of these questions and we'll chime in as appropriate.
Great. Yeah, I'll take a stab at the first question and Sara can maybe fill in the gaps here. How are educator prep programs using them? They're using them asynchronously and synchronously, and they're reporting that both work equally well depending on what their goals are. So we talked a lot about how to use them asynchronously today. When people are using them synchronously in a class, they budget about an hour to go through a simulation. And the facilitator becomes the guide on the side, not the sage on the stage. And they really facilitate the conversation. So remember when we watched that little video and then you got to a decision point, the facilitator usually has everybody vote and on how they would respond of those 4 choices. And then after that, the facilitator will say something as simple as, turn to the one person next to you, talk about what letter you chose and why. And then all of a sudden, the conversation happens in a safe space, whether you're training teachers, whether you're training principals or superintendents. So the only other thing I want to highlight is lots and lots of people are using simulations for their final experiences, because we can't always ensure that all of our future leaders or future teachers have the same experiences in their practicums or internships, whatever your program calls it. But simulations really standardize those experiences for future educators. And lots of people are using them in that way. Anything you want to add, Sara?
Yeah, I would say that the question is about educator programs, and I know many of you are from universities, but a number of you I can see are from school districts. And I recently engaged with Strasburg University in Pennsylvania, where we looked at how to use simulations throughout the principal pipeline, including with teacher clubs, getting them to use another kind of tool that was more of a flight simulator. But the idea of a simulation to see what is teaching like. The students were crazy involved. They were engaged immediately and they caught on to like sort of the rules inherent in it. We also looked at how that institution used it in their pre-service program. but for leaders and for teachers. But then the one thing I want to mention is how a partner district, a superintendent who was brave, is like, I'll use it in my all hands meeting. And it was a smaller district, so it was a reasonable sized group. But he found it incredibly valuable to have people considering together, from facilities to curriculum to personnel, ideas that might be faced in a school district, because they are all part of the same system, right? They want everybody to be working together. And it was a chance for him to bring out ideas from all the different aspects of the organization, as well as put forward, like, here are the values, here's the key things, these are the principles that we are leading with, because he got to speak from that position as a superintendent. So I think that the point is that there's lots of different ways that Sims can be used. And that work is something that I'll be publishing in the next month with my colleagues there. So it's exciting stuff's coming up.
And actually, just to add one thing to that, thank you, Sarah. The opportunity for district and university partnerships is also, obviously was assumed in what you were saying, right? In terms of, it was through East Stroudsburg that the district had access to the simulations. We've had others where university faculty are brought in to work with cohorts from districts, either as a class for some kind of a degree, or brought in for professional development. And so it does provide another vehicle by which the two institutions can work together.
Great. I'll take a stab at classroom management and school leadership development. Classroom management has been a growing concern out there from a teacher perspective. How do you deal with class disruptive behaviors, for example, and also from a school leader perspective as well. So there are simulations that are less than 12 months old that are dedicated to classroom management and classroom management strategies, which is excellent. And school leadership development. One time I was in front of 750 people at a conference, and I chose to lead them through a simulation, and they were all school leaders in the room. And at each decision point, we were able to turn the entire group of 750 people into 375 groups of 2, where people were just talking about leadership development during the presentation. Sarah, did you want to add anything? No. Okay, we'll go to number 3 here. How does simulations align with equity-centered leadership and soft skill development? If I was teaching a class for future teachers or school leaders, and my goal was equity-centered leadership and soft skill development, what I would do in a synchronous environment, when you got to your decision point, I would just say, turn to the one person next to you, talk about what letter you chose, and also focus on what we've been learning about equity-centered leadership, or what we've been learning about the important soft skills that go along with being a future teacher or a leader. So as the facilitator, what I would do is, whatever your goals are for that day, during that safe space to get people talking about their decision, that's when I would throw that in there. Anything you want to add to that, Sarah?
The one thing I would add is, depending on if time allows, is to ask students, or learners rather, to also discuss why they don't choose the other answers. And, what I hope for when I'm using one of these Sims in class is that there is somebody that disagrees, and there's some kind of discussion about why, we should or shouldn't do one or the other. And I just used these in class last week. I had them all in a Zoom space like this. I had them hold up their finger and had to kind of scan to say, what seems to be the majority for this one? And then, okay, who will speak for, you have your fingers up for number 2. And they shared and exchanged. And afterwards, I always, do both a set of debriefing questions, in a little form, a Google form. And also, I always personally use an exit slip. It was incredible how much people get from having disagreements in class. Like, I never thought of it that way. So-and-so convinced me, like, you're right. You can't always shove things down and tell people what to do. Sometimes, I mean, this was pertinent to that particular topical sim. So it's really important to get people to think, like, not just which one you pick, but why, and what's it connect to, and why not the other ones.
Great.
And one of the things I wanted to add to that is that all of the simulations are developed in partnership or collaboration with practitioners. So they're all informed or inspired by real experiences in the classroom, in the buildings, in the districts, et cetera. So in terms of that authenticity, if you will, it's there, and it's not my building, but it could be. And we use video and text because, well, they're not my people, but they could be. And as Sarah was describing, right, it provokes that thought about, seeing yourself in the action and what works, what doesn't work. That becomes part of the discussion, but it's also answer the question about how do we support classroom management? That's how the library grows, or equity-centered leadership. That's how the library grows, focusing on those. And it's important to note that we wouldn't necessarily we wouldn't write a sim on equity. What we write a sim on is leadership. In a context, the problem of practice may manifest, but the opportunity to apply leadership skills would demonstrate the equity-centered approach to leadership. So the goal in an experience is not we don't step into a bubble where the only thing at play is equity. And you're challenged with making the equity-centered decision in this moment when nothing else is going on, right? If that's what happened, we wouldn't get it wrong, at least not as often. But life presents, and it doesn't present neatly, it doesn't present orderly, and it doesn't present with only one thing at play at a time and one person at play at a time. And so the ability to apply is how we then, as David was describing, will you get them to extrapolate. If they're engaged in the narrative, they will then apply to what equity-centered leadership means, both in the context of how you've defined it from a content perspective and what it means to them. We are near the top of the hour, and I just want to take one moment. I think we can stay till over the hour, but for those of you who have to go, on the next slide, please, David, for 1 second, we'll come back to this slide. If you're interested in trying them out, if you haven't used the Sims before, we are offering an opportunity to engage with them from now until May at no cost. So you can try them out with some students and get a mini trial, if you will. So please feel free to use the QR code and be in touch. And we'd love to either sit down with you and share in more depth, but certainly an opportunity to allow you to try them out. We will be sharing a recording of the webinar, as well as providing answers to some of those questions and also to the questions we haven't yet gotten to from the chat. But thank you all for your attendance, and thank you to David and to Sarah, both for the wonderful research and partnership that you have given to us, to me, and to School Sims. And we look forward to being in touch with everybody else, but we can go back to the Q&A for those who can stick around and want to have answers to a couple more questions.
I
Great.
just am gonna anticipate a few of the questions that are elaborated upon that we saw. People were asking, what is the research? Is this better than that? Do we know about this? What about that? In terms of like making some of the choices. And the truth is there's a lack of research. We need more people engaging in researching this. I just put in the chat a link to a scoping review of research that's been done on serious games and simulations in ed leadership. So there's been more work done in teacher education. Some of you in this audience are from teacher education, so that is, I don't have a link for you for that one. Sorry.
Yeah, excellent. I would second that. I can go back to the question and answer here as well. And if there is something that is pressing in the chat feature as well, I haven't been able to watch that as closely. How can simulated learning across disciplines and engage students in the age of AI? A couple ideas that come to mind. One is at each decision point, you can have two people, if you're synchronous together, talk about why they chose the answer. And then they can do 1 or 2 sentences into a chat GPT prompt right next to them. Say, you are a principal who has a teacher that shares a concern that she has about a teacher named Diana. How do you respond professionally as a principal? Right? You could, thinking back to the little video that we watched, and then you could have the two participants evaluate what AI spit back at you and how that compared to what you talked about. Another thing is if you have a class of students that are responding in an asynchronous setting, you could have AI analyze their responses for themes, and then you can bring them together and you could say, hey, these are the themes that AI thought that emerged based on what you wrote on the discussion board. Is that similar or different to your experience that you may have had? So those are some unique ways that you could use AI. Anything else that you can think of, Sarah?
Well, a lot of people are really interested in using AI and some particular tools like character AI to generate conversation. Like you have to respond, you have to respond, you have to respond. I think you could use like an experience like this, and as an instructor, develop some prompts that you then ask students to use in some kind of generative AI tool to practice the more dynamic back and forth. So I think that's a larger point that I want to emphasize, is that this particular genre of sim, a branching, choose your own adventure style simulation, is great for asking students to consider consequences of their decisions, because after they pick one of those decisions, they get to see the consequences, right? So it helps them play that out. They can repeat it and choose differently next time. Something like generative AI that's good at kicking out, like back and forth, is maybe even better suited to like thinking, what do I say when somebody comes at me like this? Or, what should I do in this sort of situation? So, and eTips is like good at sort of thinking about what's root cause analysis. So we have different genres, at least in leadership ed. And I think that it's important to keep thinking about them as instructional tools. What kind of thinking are you asking people to do? And what's the pedagogy that you need to surround that experience with in order to help generate the learning outcomes you're interested in?
Great. And the final question and answer here, what's the best way to use them? One of the best ways to start is School Sims has taken the time to develop a portal where if you are teaching a class for future teachers or school leaders, or maybe you're a district administrator that has specific goals, you can search the portal for either keywords or themes or CAPE standards or NELP standards, or sometimes School Sims even has specific state standards that they've aligned all of the Sims to. So I would start with, as an instructor, I always think to myself, what do I want to teach? What do I want them to learn? And if you sort it that way, you'll have a pretty, you can narrow it down pretty quickly on which simulations would be the best for either online or asynchronous. Sarah, anything that you'd like to add about that? Okay.
I mean, I think the, thing to, my other field is like leadership of technology in schools specifically, but it applies to higher ed, to not be dazzled by the technology. It is a tool. Think about, what is it asking learners to do? What are you trying to get as outcomes, learning outcomes? How does the tool serve you? So not to be too overwhelmed with, oh, it's this simulation, it's this, technology, but rather, how can I use what it affords us to add value to my learners' experiences in my classroom? And, that's going to generate best practices. I know it's nice to have a blueprint to follow, but it is a pretty flexible tool.
And we have been also looking at embedding additional AI capabilities, similar to what David had mentioned. But in terms of being able to capture the prompts, or even to enable the students to reply to a prompt and maybe even record themselves doing something, and then get feedback from the AI in terms of some feedback on that particular more tactical activity, and then putting it back into and then they can continue the experience that they're having. But in terms of being able to highlight that opportunity for the extrapolation, that opportunity to go beyond just the experience, and as Sara was mentioning, right, that opportunity to is what you do with it, right? It's not about the product, it's about what you do with it, how it achieves the objectives that you have for your students. This is something that we're obviously looking to innovate and to be able to continue to enhance with the opportunity to apply this modality to the challenges that are facing our educators.
Great. Sara and I have dropped our emails. If you didn't get your questions answered and you would still like to get them, I want to be respectful of everybody's time, but we can go offline and we will be more than happy to continue the conversation. Also, if you are thinking about researching simulations, I'm still hungry to contribute to the field of literature and the research that goes along with simulations. So keep me in mind if you ever need a partner on something. Any closing thoughts from Sara?
No, thank you for coming today. I appreciate the growing
Absolutely.
interest in simulations.
If I can just reinforce one thing that David said, which is we do have some researchers that are interested in adding cohorts to their work in self-efficacy or building culturally responsive leaders. So if you're interested, please let us know, because we can put you in touch with those professors, universities, in terms of adding your cohorts to theirs as part of being part of that study. But I wanted to thank both David and Sara again for your participation, for your delivery, for your sharing of this. It's been wonderful, and look forward to further opportunities to, again, collaborate and expand the field.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night. Good afternoon.